7 months pregnant. That was the first thing Malik Johnson saw when he looked toward the bar. Aaliyah Brooks, his ex-wife. A black woman. Her waitress uniform stretched over her swollen belly. Her face was pale. She clutched her stomach, trying to breathe. Malik's chest tightened. Why was she working here? Why was she working at all in that condition? He sat across from Jasmine Carter, who kept talking about her PR victories. Her voice sounded far away. Her smile meant nothing right now. All he saw was Aaliyah, struggling to stand, alone in pain. Her knees buckled as she grabbed the counter to keep from falling. But whose baby was she carrying, and why was she still working like this? Before we continue, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from today. Do you think he will help her? Comment yes or no below. Malik Johnson was 42. Every inch of him spoke power. His Tom Ford suit fit like it was made for his bones. His black silk tie sat perfect against his crisp white shirt. The Richard Mille watch on his wrist cost more than most people's homes. People called him ruthless, visionary, a man who built an empire from nothing. Real estate, hotels, restaurants like La Maison. But tonight, under the warm lights, he felt none of that power. His dark eyes, usually cold and unreadable, burned with confusion as he watched Aaliyah. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not pregnant, not working herself to exhaustion in his world. Malik shifted in his chair. For the first time in years, his heart felt heavy in his chest. Who was he, really, if he could sit here and watch her suffer? Jasmine Carter sat across from Malik, her posture flawless. She was 36, CEO of one of the top PR firms in the state. Her red dress hugged her curves, her diamond earrings catching the candlelight. Everything about Jasmine was calculated. Her words, her smile, even the way she held her wine glass, fingertips grazing the stem with elegant precision. She glanced at Malik and saw his distant gaze. Her sharp mind clicked instantly. Something had shifted in him tonight. Jasmine thrived on control, on reading people before they read her. That was how she built her empire, by knowing exactly what everyone wanted and how to use it. But as Malik stared at Aaliyah, Jasmine's smile faded for a moment. Her brown eyes narrowed, calculating her next move, because if there was one thing Jasmine Carter hated, it was losing her grip on power. Aaliyah Brooks was 36, 7 months pregnant. Her once slender frame now carried a heavy belly beneath her faded black waitress uniform. But there was a time she dressed in tailored blazers and silk blouses. Aaliyah had been a creative director at one of the city's top advertising agencies. Her campaigns had won awards. Her ideas changed brands overnight. Now she spent her nights carrying trays heavier than she could manage. Her swollen ankles throbbed with every step. Her back ached from long hours on her feet. She felt her baby twist and kick, searching for comfort she couldn't give. She kept her head down, dark curls tied back in a loose bun, hoping no one from her old life would see her like this. But tonight Malik Johnson was there, watching her struggle, watching the woman he left behind fight to stand tall even as her world crumbled. Aaliyah balanced the silver tray in her shaking hands. 3 glasses of Bordeaux trembled with each step she took across the polished marble floor. Her black waitress uniform was worn thin at the elbows. A faded stain near the hem never fully washed out. The restaurant's soft lighting revealed every shadow under her tired eyes. Her belly pressed tightly against the stretched fabric of her apron. She winced as the baby kicked again, forcing her to pause and catch her breath. Her fingers gripped the tray harder. She couldn't drop this order. She couldn't lose another job. Not now. Rent was due. Baby clothes weren't cheap. Formula, diapers, hospital bills. Aaliyah straightened her shoulders, forcing her legs to keep moving. Each step felt heavier than the last. Across the room, Malik watched every strained movement, feeling something break deep in his chest. Malik closed his eyes for a moment. A memory flashed so vivid it hurt. Their wedding day. Aaliyah stood in front of him, wearing an ivory lace dress that hugged her curves. Her dark curls fell softly around her shoulders. She was laughing, eyes shining with tears of joy. Behind her stood the grandfather clock his parents had given them. Its golden pendulum swung gently as it chimed noon, echoing through their small living room. Aaliyah had loved that clock. She said its ticking made her feel safe, or grounded, like time itself was blessing their love. Malik remembered how she touched his polished wood that morning, smiling at him with so much hope. Now he watched her across the restaurant. No silk dress, no warm laughter. Just a tired woman with trembling hands and pain etched deep into her eyes. And he wondered when he stopped being her safe place. Jasmine reached across the table and placed her hand on Malik's chest. Her fingers rested lightly against his tailored suit. Malik, she said softly, trying to draw his eyes back to her. But his gaze stayed fixed on Aaliyah. She felt his heartbeat pounding under her palm, hard, fast, uneven. Jasmine's perfectly shaped brows drew together in a small frown. She followed his line of sight. Her eyes landed on Aaliyah, struggling to balance the tray, her belly round and heavy under the thin black uniform. Jasmine felt a flicker of annoyance rise in her chest. This woman, this waitress. Whoever she was, she clearly had power over Malik that Jasmine didn't understand, and Jasmine hated not understanding. Malik's hand twitched under hers as if he was about to stand. His jaw clenched, and for the first time since meeting him, Jasmine saw fear in his eyes. Rain slammed against their apartment windows that night. Malik stood by the door, his suitcase in hand. His face was blank, eyes cold. Aaliyah stood in the hallway, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, Malik," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. We can fix it." He shook his head once. Slow, final. "I'm done, Aaliyah," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. That hurt her the most. Thunder shook the sky as he walked out without looking back. The door closed softly behind him. Aaliyah sank to the floor, knees hitting the cold wood. Her hands covered her face as sobs tore through her chest. Outside, Malik walked into the pouring rain, feeling nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just relief to be free. But now, watching her struggle to stand, pregnant and alone, that night came crashing back like a wound that never healed. Malik tore his gaze away from Aaliyah. He forced his eyes back to Jasmine, who was still talking about her merger. Her voice sounded far away, muffled under the pounding of his heart. He clenched his jaw and took a slow breath. This wasn't his life anymore. She wasn't his life anymore. "That's the past," he told himself firmly. "She has no place in my world now." His world was clean, controlled, perfect, built on calculated decisions and powerful alliances. There was no room for a waitress with tired eyes and a belly full of questions he didn't want answered. Malik shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. He picked up his glass of wine, but his hand felt heavy. Across the room, Aaliyah pressed a hand to her stomach, her face pale with pain. Malik swallowed hard, trying to ignore the guilt burning in his chest. Malik forced himself to focus on Jasmine's words. She was outlining her strategy for a new client. Her eyes sparkled with ambition. Her manicured fingers tapped against her wine glass as she spoke. He nodded absently, pretending to listen, pretending he was still the man who cared only about deals, power, and image. But deep inside, something twisted, a quiet fear he couldn't name. He glanced back at Aaliyah one last time. She had disappeared behind the kitchen doors, leaving only the echo of her pain hanging in the air. Malik took a slow sip of wine, telling himself everything was under control, but he didn't know. He didn't know that in just a few hours his world would fracture. He would stand at a crossroads with only two paths, lose everything he had built or fight for the one thing he thought he had left behind. Aaliyah stepped out from the kitchen, tray balanced in her trembling hands. 3 glasses of red Bordeaux shimmered under the golden lights. She moved slowly, feeling every ounce of her baby's weight pressing down. Her vision blurred for a second. She blinked hard, trying to clear it. The room spun around her. The hum of quiet conversations had turned into a low roar in her ears. She took another step. Her knees buckled. The tray slipped from her grasp. Glass shattered against the marble floor. Red wine splashed across her black shoes, bleeding into the cracks of the white tiles. Aaliyah swayed, her eyes rolling back as darkness closed in. She heard distant gasps. Someone screamed. The chandelier lights above her blurred into a haze of gold and white. Then everything went silent as her body crumpled to the ground, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly. Malik pushed back his chair so hard it nearly toppled. He didn't think. His body moved before his mind caught up. He rushed across the polished marble floor, weaving between tables, ignoring the shocked stares of diners. "Aaliyah," he called out, his voice rough, cracking around the edges. She lay curled on her side, eyes closed, her breathing shallow. Red wine soaked the hem of her uniform, seeping into the cracks between the tiles. Jasmine's heels clicked behind him. "Malik," she snapped, her tone sharp. "Leave her. She's not your problem." He didn't turn. He didn't hear her. All he saw was Aaliyah, the woman he once promised to love forever, lying on the cold floor, alone and in pain. Malik knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he reached for her wrist to check her pulse. Bright lights flashed outside as paramedics rushed into the restaurant. Diners moved back, their whispers filling the silent spaces between Aaliyah's shallow breaths. Malik knelt beside her, his hand gripping hers tightly. Her skin felt cold and damp with sweat. He whispered her name over and over, hoping she could hear him through the darkness closing in. The paramedics checked her vitals quickly. One placed an oxygen mask over her mouth. Another lifted her shirt slightly to check her belly, revealing dark stretch marks in the hard curve of her swollen stomach. "We need to move her now," one of them said firmly. They rolled her onto a stretcher with swift precision. Malik stood, his legs weak, watching as they lifted her and began wheeling her out through the wide glass doors. As they loaded her into the ambulance, Malik climbed in without thinking, ignoring Jasmine's calls echoing behind him. Malik sat in the cold hospital hallway, his elbows resting on his knees. His hands were clasped together so tightly his knuckles turned white. The smell of antiseptic filled his lungs with every shaky breath. Dr. Danielle Lewis stepped out of the emergency room. Her blue scrubs were wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked tired but focused. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly. Malik stood instantly, his heart pounding in his chest. "She's suffering from severe preeclampsia," Dr. Lewis continued. "Her blood pressure is dangerously high. It's putting both her and the baby at risk." Malik felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He reached out to steady himself against the wall. What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We're trying to stabilize her," Dr. Lewis said. "But if her condition worsens, we may have to deliver the baby early to save them both." Malik stared at Dr. Lewis, her words echoing in his head like a distant thunder. Preeclampsia. Risking her life, risking the baby's life. His chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. He pressed a trembling hand against his forehead, trying to steady himself, but his vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to her, not like this. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking uncontrollably, fingers twitching as if searching for something to hold on to. The weight of everything crashed down on his shoulders, heavier than any deal he had ever closed, heavier than any empire he had built. He thought about her smile on their wedding day, the warmth in her eyes when she whispered his name. Now all he could think was, what if she never opened those eyes again? Malik closed his eyes and let the memory wash over him. It was their first wedding anniversary. Aaliyah had cooked his favorite dinner, grilled salmon with lemon butter and roasted asparagus. They sat on the floor of their tiny living room, candles flickering around them. The grandfather clock ticked softly in the corner, counting each precious second. She wore a simple white dress that hugged her curves. Her curls fell loosely down her back. Her smile was soft and warm, lighting up the dim room brighter than any chandelier. Malik remembered feeding her a forkful of salmon, laughing when she almost dropped it on her dress. He remembered the way she leaned into him, her head resting on his chest, whispering, "I feel safe with you." In that moment he had promised himself he would protect her forever. Now he wondered when he had forgot that promise. Back at La Maison, Jasmine sat alone at their table, swirling her wine slowly. Her eyes were cold as she stared at the empty seat where Malik had sat minutes ago. She pulled out her phone, her red nails tapping the screen with sharp precision. Within seconds, she typed a short message to her assistant. "Leak this to the press," she wrote. "Malik Johnson seen rescuing pregnant waitress. Possible gold digger scandal." She attached a blurry photo one of the diners had taken. Malik kneeling beside Aaliyah, his hand clutching hers tightly. Jasmine read over her message once more, her lips curling into a faint smile. She pressed send. Almost immediately her phone buzzed with confirmation. She leaned back in her chair, satisfied. If Malik wanted to throw his life away for this woman, Jasmine would make sure he paid the highest price for it. The news spread like wildfire. By midnight, social media was flooded with headlines and blurry photos. Malik Johnson spotted saving pregnant waitress. Billionaire entangled in secret love child scandal? Who is the mystery woman carrying Malik Johnson's baby? Twitter threads dissected every detail. Her uniform, her swollen belly, his hand gripping hers with desperate urgency. Comment sections exploded. Some called her a gold digger. Others defended her, saying no pregnant woman should be working that late. Speculation churned without mercy. Malik's PR team started calling his phone nonstop. Emails flooded his inbox. Investors demanded explanations. The board requested an emergency meeting. In his silent hospital chair, Malik scrolled through the chaos unfolding on his screen. His hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned white. All he could see, above the noise and lies, was Aaliyah's pale face and the faint rise and fall of her chest under the hospital sheets. Aaliyah's eyes fluttered open. Harsh fluorescent lights burned above her. The steady beep of machines filled the quiet room. She felt an oxygen tube against her cheek and the weight of the baby pressing low in her belly. She turned her head slowly and saw Malik sitting by her side. His suit jacket was draped over the chair. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He was staring at his phone, his jaw clenched tight. When he noticed her awake, relief washed over his face. But before he could speak, her phone buzzed on the small side table. She reached for it with shaking fingers. Headlines screamed back at her. Words like gold digger and billionaire's mistress blurred through her tears. Comments called her worthless, shameless, desperate. A sob broke from her chest. Her shoulders shook as silent tears soaked the thin hospital pillow. She turned away from Malik, pressing her face into the sheets, wishing the world would disappear. Malik stood slowly and moved closer to her bed. His footsteps felt heavy against the sterile hospital floor. He reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of his trembling hand. "Aaliyah," he whispered. His voice cracked with guilt and fear. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." She didn't respond. Her eyes stared blankly at the white wall in front of her. Empty, cold, like he wasn't there at all. "I swear," he continued, his throat tightening, "I didn't leak those stories. I didn't want you dragged into my world again." Still no reaction, only the slow rise and fall of her chest under the thin blanket. He swallowed hard, his heart aching at the sight of her broken spirit. The woman who once laughed so easily now lay silent and hollow. Malik lowered his head, feeling a shame deeper than he had ever known. Malik stepped out into the quiet hallway. Jasmine stood there, arms crossed over her chest, her red nails tapping against her elbow. Her eyes were sharp, scanning his tired face. "You've been here all night," she said coldly. "Your team can't reach you. Investors are threatening to pull out." He didn't respond. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion burning in his bones. Jasmine moved closer, her perfume filling the small space between them. "Look at me, Malik," she demanded. When he finally raised his eyes, hers were filled with fury. "Is this what you want? To lose everything you've built, everything we've built for her?" Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "She's nothing. A waitress, a single mother. She will drag you down until there's nothing left." Malik felt the words slice through him. But when he pictured Aaliyah lying alone in that hospital bed, he realized he didn't care about losing everything. He just couldn't lose her again. Malik's phone buzzed with a call from his mother. He stepped into the empty stairwell, bracing himself as he answered. "Malik?" Loretta Johnson's voice was cold and precise. "I've seen the news." He stayed silent, staring at the cracked paint on the concrete wall. "This woman is destroying your reputation," she continued. "The board is furious. Investors are threatening to pull out. Our stock is dropping every hour." Malik closed his eyes. The words felt heavy but familiar. Money, image, legacy, always more important than love. "You have two choices," Loretta said sharply. "Walk away from her and that child, or walk away from Betrayal Johnson Holdings forever." His chest tightened until he could barely breathe. For a moment he pictured life without the company he had helped build, without the empire his father left behind. Then he pictured Aaliyah's pale face and the small life growing inside her. And he wondered for the first time what truly mattered to him anymore. Malik sat at the long glass table, the boardroom silent except for the hum of the city outside. 12 directors stared at him with cold, expectant eyes. His mother sat at the head, her expression carved from stone. "Mr. Johnson," one director began, his tone dripping with disdain. "Care to explain this, fiasco?" Malik swallowed hard. The projector screen behind them showed headlines and blurred photos of him holding Aaliyah's hand in the restaurant. Words like secret love child and irresponsible billionaire flashed in harsh red fonts. Another board member leaned forward, voice sharp. "Do you understand how much value this has wiped from our stock overnight?" "This isn't just about your personal life," someone else added. "It's about all of us, all of our families, our legacy." Malik felt their anger surround him like ice. He looked down at his trembling hands resting on the table and realized no one in this room cared if Alia or their baby lived or died. After the meeting, Loretta called Malik into her private office. The blinds were half closed, casting shadows across the mahogany desk. She stood by the window, her posture rigid, arms folded tightly across her chest. "Sit down," she said without looking at him. Malik lowered himself into the leather chair, his hands clasped together between his knees. Loretta turned to face him, her eyes cold and sharp. "This child," she began, her voice low, each word measured with precision. "This illegitimate child will ruin you." He felt his stomach clench. "Do you understand?" she continued. "No investor will trust you. No board will respect you. Everything your father built, everything I protected will crumble because you were weak enough to let a waitress trap you." Malik's jaw tightened. For the first time in his life, his mother's words felt like poison seeping through his veins, burning everything he thought he valued. Malik stared at the floor as his mother's words echoed around the silent office. His chest felt tight, his breath shallow. For a moment, all he could hear was the rush of blood in his ears. Then another voice broke through the noise. Aaliyah's voice. Soft, warm, honest. Em don't need anything from you, she had whispered one night, curled up beside him in their old apartment. Her head rested on his chest, her fingers tracing lazy circles across his skin. I just need you here. With me. That's all. He closed his eyes, remembering the way she said it. No demands, no threats, just quiet truth. Back then he thought her words were weakness, that love should come with conditions and leverage, but sitting in his mother's office now, surrounded by polished floors and silent judgment, he wondered if Aaliyah's love had been the only real thing he ever had. Jasmine sat in her sleek office, her phone pressed to her ear. The city lights glowed behind her through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She swirled her wine glass slowly, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. Yes, she said softly. Release it now. She ended the call and refreshed her news feed. Within minutes, headlines began to appear. Waitress prepares lawsuit against billionaire Malik Johnson. Secret pregnant ex-wife demands massive settlement. Gold digger targets Johnson Holdings' fortune. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, satisfied. She knew Malik's public image was everything. Rumors like these would spread like wildfire, forcing him to choose between his empire and the woman dragging him down. She took a slow sip of wine, her eyes cold. If he wanted to play hero, she would make sure he paid for it in the only currency that mattered to him, reputation. Aaliyah lay in her hospital bed, staring blankly at the pale ceiling. The steady beep of the monitors was the only sound in the room. Her phone buzzed again with cruel headlines and comments, but she didn't have the strength to read them. The door opened softly. Imani Brooks stepped in, her heels clicking lightly against the tile floor. Her older sister's face was tired, but her dark eyes glowed with fierce love. Hey, baby girl, Imani whispered, setting down her bag before sitting on the edge of the bed. She brushed a strand of hair from Aaliyah's forehead. Aaliyah turned her head slowly, eyes filling with tears. They're calling me a gold digger, she choked out. Saying I'm suing him. I didn't. I know, Imani said firmly. She took Aaliyah's trembling hand in hers. I know who you are. Let them talk. Right now, all you need to do is stay strong for that baby. Malik stood at the doorway, watching Imani hold Aaliyah's hand. Guilt twisted deep in his chest. He took a slow step forward, his polished shoes silent against the hospital floor. Imani, he said quietly. His voice trembled despite his efforts to keep it steady. I'm so sorry. Imani looked up at him sharply. Her eyes, so much like Aaliyah's, were dark with anger. She stood, placing herself between him and the bed. Sorry, she said softly, her voice cold as steel. My sister doesn't need your apologies, Malik. He lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. The words stung, but he knew she was right. Imani stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. What she needed was you. Months ago, years ago, when she called and you didn't pick up. Malik closed his eyes, her words cutting deeper than any boardroom attack could ever reach. Dr. Lewis entered the room, her face calm but serious. She glanced at Imani, then at Malik, standing silently by the door before focusing on Aaliyah. Aaliyah, she said gently, placing a hand on the bed rail, we've been monitoring your blood pressure and the baby's heartbeat. Aaliyah looked up, her eyes filled with fear. Her hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly. Dr. Lewis took a deep breath. Your condition is worsening. The medication isn't stabilizing your blood pressure the way we need it to. If we wait any longer, it could put both you and your baby at serious risk. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Imani squeezed her sister's trembling hand as tears slid down Aaliyah's cheeks. What do you need to do, doctor? Malik asked quietly, his voice breaking. Dr. Lewis met his eyes steadily. We need to perform an emergency C-section. Today, as soon as possible. Malik sat beside Aaliyah's bed, his hands shaking as he reached for hers. Her skin felt cold under his warm fingers. The steady beep of the monitors filled the silent room like a ticking clock, counting down seconds he couldn't control. Tears blurred his vision. He blinked them away, but they fell anyway, sliding down his cheeks onto the crisp white sheets. Aaliyah, he whispered, his voice breaking with every syllable. Please, please, please stay with me. She turned her head slowly, her tired eyes meeting his. Tears gathered at the corners but didn't fall. She looked so small, so fragile, buried under the thin hospital blanket. Don't leave. He begged, his chest tightening painfully. Don't leave me. Don't leave our baby. His shoulders shook as silent sobs racked his body. For the first time in his life, Malik Johnson, billionaire empire builder, felt completely powerless. Please, he whispered again, pressing his forehead against her trembling hand. Just live. Aaliyah lay still, staring up at the ceiling. The bright hospital lights blurred through her tears. Her chest rose and fell in the shallow, tired breaths. She could feel Malik's warm hands gripping hers, his forehead pressed against her skin. She didn't speak. Words felt too heavy, too far away. All she could do was let silent tears roll down the sides of her face, soaking into the pillow beneath her. Inside, fear clawed at her chest. Fear of Lucia's leaving this world before holding her baby. Fear of never seeing the tiny life inside her take its first breath. Fear of loving Malik again, even as pain burned through every memory. She wanted to tell him everything. That she forgave him, that she still loved him no matter how hard she tried not to. But no sound came out. Only tears fell, one after another, as the monitor beeped steadily by her side. The next morning, Malik sat in his office overlooking the city skyline. His eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights. Papers lay scattered across his mahogany desk. His phone buzzed with calls from board members, lawyers, and journalists. He ignored them all. Instead, he signed the final document in front of him. His signature shook slightly at the end. 30%. Gone. Shares he had spent years building, protecting, and growing. His financial advisor cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Johnson, are you sure about this? You're giving up voting power, control." Malik didn't look up. "Do it," he said firmly. Within an hour, funds transferred into a private medical account under Aaliyah's name. Her hospital bills, lifetime insurance coverage, the highest prenatal care package money could buy. For the first time in years, he felt a strange relief in his chest. Losing power meant nothing if he couldn't save the only thing that truly mattered now. Jasmine sat across from Loretta Johnson in the quiet private lounge of Johnson Holdings. The afternoon sun filtered through sheer curtains, casting soft light on Loretta's sharp, composed face. Jasmine crossed her legs slowly, her red heels tapping lightly against the marble floor. "Mrs. Johnson," she began, her voice silky smooth, "do you realize what your son is doing right now?" Loretta didn't respond, only raised an eyebrow in silent question. "He's selling off shares, liquidating assets, spending millions to save a waitress," Jasmine said, letting each word drip with disdain. "A waitress, Loretta, pregnant with his child. He will lose his seat on the board, his influence, everything you and his father built." Loretta's jaw tightened slightly. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes cold and calculating. "Is this the legacy you want him to leave behind? To lose Johnson Holdings for a woman who serves tables?" For the first time, Loretta felt a flicker of doubt pierce her iron heart. Loretta's eyes darkened as Jasmine's words settled between them like poison. For a moment, silence filled the room. The faint ticking of Loretta's gold wristwatch was the only sound. Then, without warning, Loretta raised her hand and slapped Jasmine hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed against the marble walls. Jasmine gasped, her hand flying to her stinging cheek. "What the hell?" "Shut your mouth," Loretta hissed, her voice trembling with rage and something deeper. Pain. "You think I don't know what I've done? I raised him to care about money, power, image. Everything except love. Her chest heaved as tears burned in her eyes. "I've already lost my son because I was too much like you." Jasmine stared at her, speechless, as Loretta turned away, her shoulders shaking. In that moment, Loretta Johnson realized she had built an empire of stone but raised a son without a home for his heart. For a few quiet hours, the hospital room felt almost peaceful. Aaliyah lay resting, her eyes closed, her breathing calm and steady. Malik sat beside her, holding her hand gently, his thumb tracing circles against her skin. He allowed himself to hope, just for a moment, that maybe everything would be okay, that maybe this nightmare was finally ending. But then Aaliyah's eyes flew open, her back arched off the bed as a sharp, strangled cry tore from her throat. "Malik," she gasped, her face twisting into pain. "It hurts. It hurts so much." The fetal monitor beside her beeped erratically. Alarms sounded, echoing through the room. The flat, frantic sounds cut through Malik's chest like knives. A nurse rushed in, her eyes wide with urgency. "Her blood pressure is spiking. The baby's heart rate is dropping." In that single moment, Malik realized his worst fear was coming true. Dr. Lewis rushed into the room, flanked by two nurses. She quickly scanned the monitors, her face tight with focus. "She's crashing," one nurse said, her voice trembling. "The baby's heart rate is falling fast." Aaliyah clutched Malik's hand, tears streaming down her cheeks as pain racked her body. Her breathing came in short, ragged gasps. Dr. Lewis turned to Malik, her eyes sharp but filled with compassion. "We need to take her in for an emergency C-section right now," she said firmly. "The baby is in distress. If we wait any longer, we could lose them both." Malik swallowed hard, his throat dry. What are her chances?" Dr. Lewis paused for half a second before answering. 50-50. His heart dropped to the floor. 50-50. A coin toss between life and death. Between everything and nothing. Malik bent down, pressing his lips to Aaliyah's forehead, silently praying she would come back to him. A nurse placed a clipboard in Malik's trembling hands. The consent form. Words like emergency surgery, maternal risk, and neonatal intensive care blurred on the page. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, "we need your signature to proceed." His eyes burned with unshed tears as he stared at the paper. The pen felt heavy between his fingers. His hand shook so violently the tips scratched the form before settling on the signature line. He glanced at Alia one last time. Her eyes were closed, her face pale with pain and fear. Her hand lay limp on the bed, the monitor beeping erratically beside her. Taking a shaky breath, Malik pressed the pen down and signed his name. The ink bled slightly into the paper fibers. He handed it back to the nurse, his fingers cold and numb. As they wheeled Aaliyah away, Malik felt a darkness settle in his chest, heavier than any loss he had ever known. Bright surgical lights flooded the operating room. Nurses moved swiftly, preparing tools, checking monitors, adjusting IV lines. Dr. Lewis stood at Aliyah's side, her eyes calm but focused, calling out vitals to the team. Outside, Malik sat alone in the dim waiting room, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped so tightly they ached. His eyes stared blankly at the tiled floor, but his mind was far away. He pictured their old apartment, the small living room with peeling paint and thin curtains. In the corner stood the grandfather clock, its dark wood worn smooth from years of gentle polishing. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Even now it kept counting the seconds back at his house, alone in the silent halls. Each chime marked another moment Aaliyah lay under the cold blade of fate. He closed his eyes and prayed to hear its chime again, not as a funeral bell, but as a promise of life still waiting to begin. Malik leaned back against the cold waiting room wall, eyes closed, fighting back the burning tears. His mind drifted to a quiet evening long ago. He saw Aaliyah sitting cross-legged on their old beige rug, her hair tied up messily, a steaming cup of chamomile tea in her hands. The apartment was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. She had smiled at him softly, her eyes glowing with calm. "That clock," she whispered, resting her head against his knee. "Its chime makes me feel peaceful. Like no matter what happens out there, in here, everything's okay." Malik clenched his jaw, his chest tightening until breathing hurt. He could almost hear the clock now, faint and distant, counting each second without her. Tick-tock, tick-tock. He prayed that somewhere beyond this pain she would hear it too, and find her way back to him. The waiting room door opened softly. Malik looked up, his heart pounding so loudly he thought he might collapse. Dr. Lewis stepped in, her blue surgical cap still on, her eyes tired but steady. He rose quickly, his voice shaking. Are they... Dr. Lewis gave a small nod. "Your daughter is here. She's small but strong, breathing on her own." A sob of relief escaped his lips before she continued, her tone lowering. "But Aaliyah..." She paused, glancing down at the clipboard in her hands before meeting his eyes again. "She lost a lot of blood. Her blood pressure crashed. We stabilized her, but she hasn't woken up yet." Malik felt the world tilt beneath his feet, the words blurred together in his mind. Dr. Lewis placed a gentle hand on his arm. "She's alive, but she's in a coma." Tears spilled down Malik's cheeks as he whispered, "Please, just let her wake up. She needs to see her daughter." Malik followed Dr. Lewis down the long, sterile hallway. Every step felt heavy, like he was moving through water. She stopped in front of a glass window. Inside, rows of tiny incubators lined the softly lit room. "There she is," Dr. Lewis whispered, pointing to a small bundle swaddled in pale yellow blankets. Nurses moved gently around her, adjusting wires and checking monitors. Suddenly, a soft, desperate cry rose from the incubator. Malik's chest tightened painfully. Tears blurred his vision as he pressed his hand against the glass. Her cry was weak but fierce, a sound so small yet powerful enough to shatter every wall he had built around his heart. His shoulders shook with silence as he had imagined this moment for so long. Their child entering the world, but never like this. Not with Aaliyah lying alone in darkness, unable to hear the daughter's first cries that echoed with life, hope, and silent pleas for her mother's touch. Loretta arrived at the hospital late that evening. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she walked down the silent hallway. When she reached the nursery window, she saw Malik, standing there, his forehead resting against the glass, eyes swollen from crying. She followed his gaze to the tiny baby girl sleeping under glowing warmth. Her chest rose and fell in the shallow breaths, her tiny fingers curled into fists by her face. Loretta's breath caught in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes as she pressed a trembling hand against the window. The baby stirred slightly, her small mouth opening in a silent yawn. "Beautiful," Loretta whispered, her voice breaking. Her shoulders shook as tears rolled down her powdered cheeks. "So beautiful." She closed her eyes, her hand still against the glass. "Forgive me," she whispered, her voice raw. "Forgive me for everything I've done to your mother and to your father." In that quiet moment, Loretta Johnson felt her iron heart finally crack open with regret. Jasmine strutted through the glass doors of her PR firm, her red heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. Assistants rushed to greet her with unnervous smiles, files clutched tightly in their hands. She barely glanced at them. Her phone buzzed endlessly with calls from journalists and board members about Malik's scandal. A cruel smile touched her lips as she imagined his empire crumbling. But as she reached her office, 2 men in dark suits stepped into her path. She frowned, irritation flashing across her perfect features. "Miss Carter?" one agent said, holding up a badge. "FBI, you're under arrest for money laundering and fraud." The words punched the air from her lungs. "What? This is a mistake!" Before she could finish, cold metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. Cameras flashed from behind the reception desk as agents led her away. For the first time in years, Jasmine felt fear cut deeper than her ambition ever had. Malik sat in the dim nursery, the only light coming from the small lamp by the incubator. Nurses had helped him carefully lift his daughter into his arms. She felt impossibly light, her tiny body wrapped snugly in a pale pink blanket. He cradled her close to his chest, feeling her warmth seep into his cold, trembling hands. Her small face pressed softly against his shirt, and she let out a tiny sigh, her eyelids fluttering as if dreaming. Tears blurred his vision. He bent his head and pressed his lips gently to her forehead, breathing in her newborn scent of milk and warmth and hope. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're so strong, so strong." He drew in a shaky breath, blinking back tears. "Your name is Lily Johnson. You're Daddy's little princess. And I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know just how deeply you're loved." Malik stood at the foot of Aaliyah's hospital bed, his heart pounding with relief as her eyes fluttered open for the first time in days. Her gaze drifted across the room, unfocused, before landing on him. "Hi," he whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. "You're awake." She blinked slowly, her brow furrowing, her lips parted, but no words came out. Confusion clouded her tired eyes. Dr. Lewis stepped forward, her tone calm but serious. "Mr. Johnson, Aaliyah's vitals are stable and her body is recovering well." Malik's shoulders relaxed slightly until the doctor continued, her voice softening. "But there is something you need to know. She's experiencing temporary memory loss. It's likely due to the trauma, surgery, and blood loss." Malik felt the world tilt beneath him again. Aaliyah stared at him blankly, no recognition in her gaze. Dr. Lewis placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Be patient. Memories can return with time, care, and familiar love." Malik never left her side. Day blended into night as he sat in the small chair beside Aaliyah's bed, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. He watched every flicker of her eyelashes, every rise and fall of her chest. Nurses came and went, adjusting IV lines and checking monitors. They urged him to go home, to sleep, to eat. He ignored them all. When she woke, he would sit up straighter, hope lighting in his tired eyes. But each time she only looked at him with polite confusion, her gaze drifting away, her mind still locked behind fog. At night he pulled the thin hospital blanket around his shoulders, listening to the quiet beep of the monitors. He whispered stories about Lily, about their old apartment, about the grandfather clock that still ticked in his silent house. He prayed each word would find its way back into her forgotten heart. Amani stood by the window, staring out at the gray morning sky. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her shoulders trembling with silent sobs. She turned to look at Aaliyah, lying still in her hospital bed, eyes open but empty. Malik sat beside her as always, gently brushing stray curls from her forehead, whispering words she couldn't remember. Tears spilled down Imani's cheeks as she shook her head. "Why?" she choked out, her voice breaking. "Why does God do this to her?" She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to stifle her cries. "She's been through enough," she whispered through trembling lips. Why take her memories too? Why make her forget the love she fought so hard to keep?" Malik looked up at her, his own eyes wet with grief. But he said nothing. There were no answers that could ease this cruel ache. Only silent prayers and hope remained. The next morning, hospital staff wheeled in a large, covered object. Malik stood up quickly from his chair, watching as they carefully positioned it in the corner of Alia's room. When the cloth was pulled away, the grandfather clock stood tall, its dark wood polished to a warm glow. The brass pendulum swung gently, ticking in quiet, steady beats that filled the silent space. Imani covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Malik stepped closer to the bed, his eyes never leaving Alia's pale face. "She loved that sound," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She always said it made her feel safe." The clock chimed softly, the familiar melody echoing through the room. Alia's eyelids fluttered at the sound, her fingers twitching slightly against the blanket. Malik's heart leapt with hope. Maybe, just maybe, this sound would reach her where words could not, guiding her back through the darkness to the love waiting on the other side. That evening, the hospital room was quiet except for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. Malik sat beside Alia, holding her limp hand in his. The shadows grew long against the walls as dusk settled over the city. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling until he found the song. Their song. He pressed play. Soft piano chords filled the room, the melody slow and gentle. It was the same song they danced to on their wedding night, surrounded by candlelight and laughter, her white dress sweeping against the floor as she laughed into his chest. Malik closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Do you hear it, baby?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "This was our forever song. You said you'd never forget it." The music swelled, wrapping around them like a quiet promise. Alia's fingers twitched slightly in his palm, a flicker of life fighting to remember love. The soft wedding melody continued to play, wrapping the small hospital room in memories only he could feel. Malik squeezed Alia's hand gently, whispering her name over and over, like a prayer. Then her eyelids fluttered. Slowly her dark eyes opened, blinking against the dim light. For at the brief second, Malik saw the woman he loved staring back at him. His breath caught in his throat as hope burned bright in his chest, but her gaze drifted away almost instantly. She looked around the room, confused, her eyes dull and empty. Finally, they settled on him, lingering without recognition. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice weak and hoarse. Malik felt his heart shattered into pieces. Tears filled his eyes as he swallowed the lump in his throat. I'm Malik," he said softly, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I'm your husband." She only blinked, her expression lost and distant as the song faded into silence. Alia's eyes remained distant, lost somewhere Malik couldn't reach. Her gaze drifted to the ceiling as silent tears rolled down his face. Suddenly, a sharp, desperate cry cut through the quiet room. Lily's voice, small but fierce, echoed like an alarm in the stillness. The nurse stepped forward, ready to soothe her, but Malik shook his head gently. With trembling hands, he lifted his tiny daughter from her bassinet. Her soft wails grew louder as he carried her to Alia's bedside. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She needs you." He lowered Lily onto Alia's chest, guiding her small body until she lay curled against her mother's warmth. Lily's cries softened to small whimpers as she settled against Alia's heartbeat. Alia's fingers twitched weakly. Slowly, her gaze dropped down to the tiny baby on her chest. Her lips parted, her breath catching as a tear slipped down her cheek. For the first time, something flickered in her empty eyes. Something real, something alive. Alia stared down at the small, wriggling bundle on her chest. Lily's tiny fist gripped the loose fabric of her hospital gown, her mouth searching instinctively for warmth. Tears streamed down Alia's cheeks as she let out a soft, broken sob. Her fingers trembled as they brushed over Lily's downy hair. A faint smile flickered at the corners of her lip, fragile and fleeting. Her eyes filled with wonder, fear, and something deeper, a quiet, aching love. Malik watched, hope surging painfully in his chest. "Do you remember her name?" he whispered, voice tight with emotion. "She's Lily. Our daughter." Alia didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on Lily, her tears falling onto the baby's warm blanket. Slowly, she shook her head, her gaze never lifting to Malik. I don't know you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "But she feels like mine." Malik swallowed hard, his heart breaking and mending all at once as he watched mother and a child breathe together in quiet, fragile love. Loretta stood silently in the doorway, watching Alia cradle Lily against her chest. Tears welled in her eyes as she saw the way Alia's trembling fingers cupped the baby's small head, her soft sobs filling the quiet room. She took a shaky step forward, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum floor. Malik looked up at her, his eyes red and hollow from sleepless nights. For a moment, Loretta couldn't speak. Her throat tightened around words she had never learned to say. Finally, her voice broke the silence. "Malik," she whispered, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I was wrong." He stared at her, silent. Loretta swallowed, her shoulders shaking. "I thought I was protecting you, protecting our family's name, but I only brought pain." Her gaze shifted to Aaliyah and Lily, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong about her. I was wrong about everything." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please, forgive me." Night fell quietly over the hospital. The only sound in Aaliyah's room was the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock. Its deep, steady rhythm filled the silent space with warmth and memory. Malik stood beside it, his hand resting on the smooth, dark wood. He closed his eyes, feeling the vibration of each tick beneath his palm. His shoulders trembled as he bowed his head, the tears slipping silently down his face. "Please," he whispered into the quiet. His voice cracked under the weight of helplessness. "Please, bring her back to me." His fingers curled around the edge of the clock. "I don't care about the company. I don't care about money or legacy or status. I just want her. I want her to remember us, to feel safe again, to know that she is loved beyond every mistake I've ever made." The clock chimed softly, its echo deep and clear, as if carrying his prayer into the darkness. Malik stood silently by the grandfather clock, his hand still pressed against the smooth wood, eyes closed in prayer. The ticking filled the room with a steady, mournful rhythm. Suddenly, a sharp knock broke the quiet. He turned quickly to see a tall man in a darkish suit standing at the doorway. Papers were clutched tightly in his hand, his expression stern and impersonal. "Mr. Johnson," the man said, his voice clipped and formal. Malik frowned, feeling a cold unease slip down his spine. "Yes?" The lawyer stepped into the room, glancing briefly at Alia and Lily before clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to disturb you at such a difficult time, but I've been sent to inform you. A petition has been filed regarding custody of your daughter." Malik's blood ran him cold. What do you mean?" The lawyer sighed. "Someone is challenging your right to keep Lily. They're filing for full custody." Malik's heart pounded with fear as the world began to tilt beneath his feet once again. Malik stared at the lawyer, his mind spinning with disbelief. Who is filing for custody?" he demanded, his voice low and trembling with rage. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the paper in his hand. "The petition was filed by Robert Carter," he said quietly. "Jasmine Carter's father." Malik felt the blood drain from his face. Robert Carter, powerful, ruthless, and vengeful. A man who built his empire by crushing anyone in his path. The man who had once wanted Malik as a son-in-law to expand his influence. "Why?" Malik whispered, though he already knew the answer. The lawyer hesitated before replying. "It states, he believes your current situation is unstable for the child, but off record, everyone knows he wants revenge. He blames you for Jasmine's arrest and disgrace." Malik clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white, as if losing Aaliyah's memory wasn't enough. Now another enemy threatened to tear apart what little hope remained. Malik stood frozen, staring at the lawyer as the weight of those words settled heavy in his chest. The quiet ticking of the grandfather clock behind him seemed louder now, each second pounding against his skull. He took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. Slowly he turned to look at Alia lying weakly in bed, their daughter sleeping peacefully against her chest. His heart throbbed with a fierce, protective love. "No," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He looked back at the lawyer, his dark eyes burning with determination. "Tell Robert Carter, I will fight him with everything I have." The lawyer hesitated, sensing the steel in Malik's words. Malik stepped closer, his voice lowering to a cold whisper. "Lily is my daughter. She is my blood. She's the only light left in this world for me." He swallowed hard, tears brimming but refusing to fall. "She's my whole life, and I will burn every empire to the ground before I let anyone take her away." The courtroom was silent except for the echoing voice of Malik's lawyer presenting their case. Aaliyah sat beside Malik, her face pale, eyes blank as she stared down at her trembling hands. She felt detached from it all. The tension, the whispers, the cold glares from Robert Carter's legal team, none of it made sense to her fogged mind. Then the lawyer played a video clip as evidence. The quiet room filled with the sound of Malik's deep voice recorded during a home interview, describing his devotion to Lily and Aaliyah. In the background of the video, a familiar sound rang out. the grandfather clock chiming its deep melodic notes. Aaliyah gasped softly. Her eyes widened as her breath quickened. The ticking filled her chest, vibrating through her bones. Images flooded her mind, dancing in their living room, laughing as the clock struck midnight, kissing Malay under its shadow on their wedding night. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she turned to him, her voice trembling. "Malik," she whispered, I remember." Tears streamed down Aaliyah's cheeks as the memories rushed back, filling every empty corner of her mind with warmth and pain all at once. Her chest heaved with quiet sobs as she turned fully to face Malik. His eyes locked onto hers, wide with shock and hope, his lips trembling as if he were too afraid to speak. She reached out with shaking fingers, brushing them lightly against his jaw. The feel of his rough stubble under her touch sent another wave of memories crashing through her. Late nights, whispered dreams, quiet kisses in the dark. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her tears. "I'm so sorry, Malik." He shook his head quickly, tears now falling freely down his cheeks. "No, no, baby, you don't need to be sorry." A sob broke through her chest as she clutched his hand tightly. "I'm sorry for leaving you in my dreams," she cried softly, her voice trembling. "For forgetting us, for leaving you all alone in our love." Malik held her hand tightly, tears streaming down his face as he kissed her trembling fingers. Aaliyah's eyes shone with love and pain, her chest rising and falling with quiet sobs. Beside them, little Lily lay sleeping in her bassinet. As if sensing their moment, she stirred, her tiny hand reaching out blindly between them. Malik gently lifted her hand of him and placed it over Aaliyah's, wrapping his own around them both. The grandfather clock chimed softly in the quiet hospital room. Its deep, warm sound filled the space with hope and memory. Malik took a shaky breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple diamond ring that sparkled softly under the dim light. "Aaliyah," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Will you marry me again?" She gasped, her tears falling faster as she nodded weakly. "Yes. Yes, Malik." The clock continued to chime as their hands clasped tightly around Lily's, sealing their promise in its timeless echo. Do you believe true love can revive lost memories? Comment "I believe" or "I don't believe" to let me know what your heart says.